Welcome to Ask the Church, our video series where we seek to answer your questions about church worship, practice, or theology in under 5 minutes. Today's question is about the image of God. What does it mean that we are made in the image of God? How can we all be made in the image of God, given the diversity and variety of humanity? It's important to note at the outset that this question is a complicated question, and theologians have not always agreed on the answer to it. I'm going to offer an answer that includes elements that I think everybody would agree on, and then elements that are perhaps disputed, but I think still helpful to consider. In terms of things that we would all agree on, humanity is made in the image of God, and that's not in the sense of its physicality. God is pure spirit. It's not that our bodies are models of His. He's pure spirit, and so whatever image of God means, it's not our bodies. It's also important to note that being made in the image of God is actually male and female. Genesis 1 is explicit about that. It's not just men or just women, but male and female, we are made in the image of God. It's also at the beginning to note, and these are all the things that we would all agree on, that whatever it means that we are made in the image of God, that this was corrupted and polluted in the fall. This is something that wasn't lost in its entirety, but it was distorted. And so you see this break after the fall where suddenly Adam and Eve have children who are born in their image. And that doesn't mean that God's image is lost, but it is corrupted. We leap forward from there to Colossians 1, where Paul describes Jesus as the image of God. And we can begin to see that our image of God, what we bear, was corrupted, not entirely lost, but it's only ever been fulfilled perfectly in Jesus Christ. He is God's icon. That's the language of Colossians 1, our image. He is the perfect human. He is, as Colossians 1, the firstborn, the one who does what Adam and Eve were to have done, what we were to have done. In other words, He is the perfect image of God. Then, because we're joined to Him in the redemption, as His work as the incarnate Son, as He redeems us, joined to Him, we actually then can participate in the uncorrupted, unpolluted understanding of what it means that we're made in the image of God. So we're given this thing that's corrupted, but that's achieved perfectly, lived perfectly in Christ, and therefore we can participate again in the same thing in His redemptive work. But now we have to articulate, what is this thing that we're talking about, to be made in the image of God? What is this thing that Jesus did perfectly? And we can talk about this from several angles. The first one is what we would call the ontological angle. In other words, in our very being, we actually have something of God's nature in us, that God gave some gift to us that He didn't give to any other part of His creation, that something of God's nature is given to us. And this is actually something that Peter picks up in 2 Peter 1:4, that in the redemption, we become what we were supposed to have been at the very beginning. And he says that we are actually partakers of the divine nature. This is God's promise to us, that somehow something of His nature we get to partake of. So the first idea of the image of God is simply that there is something of God's that we hold in our very nature. We become a partaker of something divine. The second category after that ontological, that sort of our essence category, is the idea of our position. Being made in the image of God means being given God's role in the world. We were made to be stewards, rulers over creation, like God's lieutenants, His viceroys, to stand in His place towards the rest of creation. In other words, being made in the image of God is about the role we play with creation. It's being His representative, being the one, His ambassador, who goes out in His name. And we can begin to see how this is restored in being joined to Jesus, the perfect representative, the perfect ambassador. So first, being made in the image of God is actually our very being, that we participate in God's nature in some way, and that's restored in the redemption. Second, it's our position, that we act as God to the rest of creation, that we're actually His lieutenants or viceroys. And again, that's restored in Jesus Christ, and we get to participate in it in Him. But those two answers, the ontological, the essence, and the functional, or the role we play, the position, lead to the third category. And that's the category of the faculties that we need to do those other two. In other words, if we're going to be God's representatives on earth, God needed to give us faculties fitting with that, abilities, giftings. And so you could look at our image bearing as being the thing that we've received of God's nature. You could look at it as our standing in God's place towards creation. And you can look at it as our abilities that enable us to do those things. And so then you say, what are those abilities that God gave us? And that's where we begin to talk about our relational capacities. God gave a unique relational capacity to humans that he didn't give to the other creatures. Our spiritual capacities, our ability to know him, our hunger for truth and justice and mercy and beauty. These faculties that he's given us, our unique rationality. In other words, he gave us the stuff that we needed to be able to be his representatives, to partake of his divine nature. Again, all these things were corrupted in the fall. Our essence, our position, and our faculties, but all of them, because they're lived perfectly in Jesus, are restored and we're able to participate in them again as we're redeemed and joined to him. So being in his image means sharing of his nature, partaking in his divine nature. It means being him towards creation, standing in his place, representing him, being a viceroy or a lieutenant or an ambassador. And it means the capacities we need to be able to do that. Love for justice, rationality and working out the hard things of life, relating with one another in love and mercy and forgiveness, longing for the presence of God, the spirituality, essence, position, and faculties. I hope that this answer helps. As always, thanks for watching this edition of Ask the Church. If you have other questions, send them to Stephen@incarnationrichmond.org. And now go in the grace of God.